What's the secret of your success? You've been around for such a long time. How has it happened? How have you survived all these years?
When I first became an MP, I took over a seat that had been held previously, not immediately before me, but sometime in the past, by Sir John Marshall. And about a week after I became an MP, I met him for the first time, and we became quite friendly, and I knew him well for the rest of his life. And he gave me a piece of advice, and he said, be loyal to this electorate, and it will be loyal to you. And I guess what I've tried to do over the last 24 years is be loyal to the needs and the interests and the views of my constituents, in the hope that they will return that loyalty to me. And you know, I presume they have. I presume that's part of the reason why I've retained the seat for the period that I have. But it was very sage advice, and I've always tried to live up to it. You know, I'm a representative. Who am I representing? What are their interests? How do I articulate those? Now, some will say, you don't. You miss me out completely. But hopefully there's enough that say, yes, you do represent what we would like to see our MP doing and looking like.
Was he your greatest mentor, John Marshall?
In that sense, he was. In many senses, I'm similar to John Marshall. I mean, John, or Sir Jack, as I called him, was a very liberal man in the traditional sense of that word, a person who was tolerant of others, who was compassionate towards others, but who was guided by some very firm principles. I'd like to think I'm in the same mould. Another person who in earlier years had a huge influence on me, I knew him when I was a much younger person in my teens, was Norman Kirk. And the vision that he had, there were two aspects to his vision that inspired me and why I originally joined the Labour Party. One was a view about New Zealand's place in the world, that we were not just some little isolated place down here, we could speak up for the issues we were concerned on. And secondly was his compassion for the family, for doing things that were in the interest of New Zealand families, because that was how you helped the state of New Zealand become stronger and more vibrant. And I guess it was the combination of all of those things that led me down the political path that I followed.
Can you tell us a little bit about your own family, your childhood?
I was the oldest in a family of four. My parents, I've got two brothers and a sister. We grew up in Christchurch. My father was a businessman. We were not well off, but we were not poor. We were comfortable. We lived in a good upper middle class suburb. And life was pretty good for me, really, through the 60s. It changed quite dramatically when I was 17, when my father died very suddenly. And I then spent a few years knowing what it's like when the only income coming into the household was a benefit. And my father had left my mother reasonably well provided for, but life was still a struggle, particularly when she was raising 4 teenagers. And I guess that helped temper a sense of, I'm all right, Jack, with we do need to be concerned about those who are less well off and how we assist them and support them. And I admire the way in which my mother was able to manage and ensure that I was able to get a university education. And my brother also went to university. Another brother's been a successful broadcaster. My sister's been successful in what she's done. And it really comes back to the commitment of my mother, because the younger members of the family were quite young when Dad died. And then I reflect on the fact that she died not long afterwards, when I was in my early 20s. And I think that was really because of the consequences of the struggle of having to bring up a family by herself at an unexpectedly early age. And so those things have impacted upon me, and they do give me a sense of fighting for the underdog and a real determination to get justice and commitment. On the downside, I'm acutely aware that because I've never had to deal with older people, I have a big gap in my life in that respect, and I suspect therefore less tolerance for the concerns of the elderly than I should have, because it's never been, unfortunately, a part of my life, and I'm conscious of that all the time, and I try to overcompensate, but I know often that perhaps I'm not doing as well as I should.
You went to university, Canterbury University, and majored in political science. Then you went to Trade and Industry, and then the Alcoholic Liquor Advisory Council. How did you enter politics? What was the attraction for politics?
A couple of things. My grandfather had a deep political interest. He was brought up in a household where the early Labour pioneers on the West Coast lived in the later years of the 19th century. So that had some impact upon me, although not in a partisan sense. And then the things I talked about before impacted as well. And I can long remember, I can't remember why, but ever since I have got a memory, it's always been about being a politician. So I guess from there I sort of drifted into it, really. People say to me, why? I don't actually know why. It was just always something in me that I wanted to do. The opportunity came along and I took it, and I've been taking it for the last 24 years in that sense.
No regrets?
Absolutely none. There are moments in life you think, I wish I was there, particularly in terms of my children's upbringing. But then I talk to other people who've got high-profile careers outside politics, and they have the same stresses and strains, so perhaps that was a little bit of a fallacy. The greatest thing, though, is I've been privileged to be a Wellington Member of Parliament, which means I've been able to get home most evenings, and even if it's late at night, it's still my bed. I still could see when they were younger, my kids, even though they were asleep at night. And I think that was a huge strength. I couldn't have done it if I'd been commuting out of town 3 or 4 days a week, living in some dingy flat all by myself. I think I'd have gone mad.
Can political life be a lonely life at times? Do you feel isolated sometimes? I'm thinking particularly with MMP, when one minute you've got people supporting you, you've got their loyalty, and the next minute you haven't. How has that impacted on you over the years?
It is a lonely life. You've got the support of wonderful colleagues, and I'm very lucky with Judy Turner as a colleague and a friend. And I've had good colleagues over the years. But ultimately, you're making your decisions, and there are things you've got to wrestle with. Sometimes they're conscience issues, sometimes they're just issues of the day. What are we going to do about this? And it's very hard often to go and consult with someone, because you're immediately breaking a confidence. You're immediately letting someone know, hey, hang on, this is where these guys might be heading, so we can lobby them. So you've got a lot you've got to keep to yourself, and that can be lonely in one sense, straining in another. There are times I just love to be able to sit down and let it all come out, but you can't do that. Or you could, you do it once.
Yes.
So yeah, it's lonely in that sense. I remember when I first became a Member of Parliament, Dame Anne Herkes, who said to me, keep hold of your friends. Keep hold of your friends, because they will desert you, not because they disapprove of what you do, but they'll be thinking that's the best thing to do to give you space. And I thought at the time that seemed a bit strange, and went through that very experience. And she was absolutely right. You've got to redouble your efforts to keep in touch with your friends and your family, because they will want to give you the space and freedom to be by yourself. And if you're very good at sort of giving yourself that space and freedom, you will be by yourself, and that's very lonely.
Looking ahead to the election, what do you see as the single biggest issue facing New Zealanders in 2008? You know,
I think the big issue is one that's a bit of a sleeper at the moment, and I'd sum it up by the word security. I think New Zealanders are feeling increasingly uncertain about their financial security, their personal security, and we've seen that particularly in parts of Auckland of late, their emotional security, and their national security. I don't mean it in the sense of a war, but in the sense of where is New Zealand heading? What sort of country are we building? What's our ambition for New Zealand? So I wrap all of those things together. I want to see this country become proud. I want to see it become, as I think we can, the world's first truly great multi-ethnic, multicultural society, where everyone, whatever their background, contributes something to that unique species that's a New Zealander. I want to see us being a smart nation, where we are not isolated by the tyranny of our distance, but are able to compete intellectually and internationally with other countries. And I want to see us become a country that just feels confident about itself and what it has to offer. And I look around the political scene at the moment, and I see this party and that party all talking about specific problems, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and there's nothing we need to do because it's all perfect. And I think you're all missing something, and it's a vision. It's about hope. And I look at United Future and I think, by coincidence, our name is perfect. It's about a country that's united and cohesive, but it's also about a country that's focusing on its future and where it wants to be and what we need to do today to start to lay the groundwork for that. So I see us very much in that mould of being able to be not visionary in the sort of the crass sense of, you know, big dreams that can never be achieved, but the party that's prodding as a conscience, here's where we want to go. A party that's got new ideas, and a party that listens to people along the way and then tries to incorporate those views into its thinking.